Well, before we get into the message, something happened this morning that happened similarly a few weeks ago. I added some scripture beforehand. Um, let me walk you through my Sunday morning routine. As I wake up, this morning I woke up a little late, but I wake up and I go and I spend some time with the Lord. I get some coffee first, and then I spend some time with the Lord, and then I work out for a little while, and I got to get the time with the Lord and the workout done before the kids get up, or it just doesn't happen. And so I go and I take care of that. And usually while I'm working out, I'll usually, have something going on the DVR and you get caught up on, or I'll have Netflix going. Because if you're watching something or you're listening to something, working out goes faster and doesn't seem as bad. So I'll have something going and pay attention to that, not really paying attention to the reps I'm doing. And but on Sundays, I've gotten in the habit, usually on Sundays in the past, I'll have a sermon going of, some other preachers I like to listen to. They feed me and all this. And so I'll have some of that going. And so I had one going this morning, and God began to speak. And I was listening a little bit to what God was saying, and He actually gave me a message for May, so get ready, that one's coming. But we got breakfast ready, and I went and took a shower, and right before I hop in the shower, God gave me something that I wasn't expecting. But it fits perfect because when I ran through my message yesterday, I usually run through it. You wouldn't believe it by how long I go sometimes, but I usually run through it and time myself to see how long it takes. Not that has any effect on how long I preach out here, but I was thinking yesterday when I finished, I was like, man, it was kind of short. Some of you are thinking, man, why didn't we get the short one today? But I was like, what else do you have, God? And He said, well, I'll tell you later. So He told me this morning. So I dropped this on Micah, who's running our screen today, right before the service started. We're going to open in Mark chapter 9. This is actually going to tie perfect into the main scripture we're going to hit in John chapter 20. John chapter 9, this is just a little preface. This is the foreword before even the intro to the main body of work here. You know what? Why don't you stand up while we read this? And I'm going to have you read something back to me in just a minute. We're going to start down at verse 20 of Mark 9. This is on page 845 if you're using the Bible on the rack. It's not in the YouVersion Bible app because I did the YouVersion Bible app on Thursday and didn't get into it this morning to add it. So it's on Mark chapter 9, page 845. What's going on here is this dad shows up to try to get Jesus to heal his son. His son is going through a whole mess. He has a demon in him, but it's killing his son. And he brings him to Jesus to heal. Verse 20. And they brought the boy to Jesus. And when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. And it has often cast him into fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. So you can hear the desperation in the father's voice there. It often casts him into fire. It casts him into water. I mean, if you're a parent who is a caregiver of a child, you can understand a little bit of this. But they're having to watch the kid 24/7 because the demon is throwing the child, whenever there's a fire, into the fire. Or whenever they're near a body of water, the demon throws the child into a body of water to try to drown him. So every time they're near fire, every time they walk by a lake or they're driving by a lake, they're holding on for fear that he's going to jump out and dive in and drown. And so he's begging Jesus, if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. And Jesus said to him, if you can, all things are possible for one who believes. And immediately the father of the child cried out. He cried out, he wept as he cried, and he said, I believe. Help my unbelief. Y'all say that back to me. I believe. Help my unbelief. And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, you mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out. And the boy was like a corpse, so that many of them said, he is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him, and he arose. Y'all have a seat. I believe, help my unbelief. And Jesus heals him. Even though there is some belief in the Father, there is some element of belief there, but even in the belief, there is ample amount of unbelief as well. His experience in the past has told him that nothing can help his son. If he's like any fathers today, which he probably is, they went and saw every doctor they could. They saw every experimental doctor they could, and nothing had worked. Nothing had healed him. Nothing had gotten the child better. And so they went to Jesus. And he's thinking, I believe maybe something can happen. Maybe Jesus can do a work. But there's also that element of unbelief, as any of you who've ever been to the doctor multiple times have thought, maybe this will work, but probably not, because I've been to so many others and done so many other things that this is not really going to have any effect whatsoever. And that's the attitude the Father brings, and he begs Jesus, I believe, help me in my unbelief. Now turn over to John chapter 20. We're going to see that same imagery here with one of Jesus' disciples who's experiencing the same kind of belief and unbelief. He puts conditions on his belief. He doesn't quite have the kind of faith that he needs. His experience has taught him one thing, and that changes how he acts. I saw this, actually, one of my sons mentioned it to me this morning. We're talking about breakfast. Does anybody like breakfast? Anybody like breakfast? You don't have to eat breakfast to like it. You know, some people don't eat breakfast, but breakfast is amazing. It was always very important in our house growing up. Dad always cooked breakfast. I cook it at our house. It's probably ingrained in me. And we usually have a rotation of things that we bring through for breakfast that I cook. Sundays are waffle days. I cook waffles. And they're not freezer waffles. I mean, I've got a recipe, scratch it, you know, and we make the waffles. And actually, they had this morning, I had some homemade syrup. We had that. And so we have waffles some days. Some days we have pancakes. Some days I'll shake it up and make the pancakes a little thinner and flip them over, spread some Nutella on the underside, and then roll it up. It's pancake roll-ups is what I call it, and that way they can hold it and walk around and eat it or whatever. But we don't give the Nutella to Hope, because then she gets Nutella hair, and it's everywhere, and it changes her blonde to Nutella colored, and it's not good. And which we gave her peanut butter for a while, and then it turned into peanut butter hair, and so we got to wait till she can not rub things in her hair, which may never happen. So we do pancakes, we do waffles, we also do some biscuits. And something that we used to have growing up that we didn't usually give, I haven't really given it to our kids, the boys particularly. I've got 4 kids and one more coming. We've a surprise to some of you. We do have one more coming in September. Praise Jesus, we're excited. God is the God of everything, and we're excited. The kids are pumped, and we're pumped, and it's going to be amazing. But we got 3 boys and a girl right now, and I'll usually give I try to give all 4 of them the same thing, but if it's something a little bit different that I know the baby Hope will kind of, not enjoy, or it will end up being more of a struggle than anything else, I will not give it to her. I'll give her something else because I don't want to start the day off with a struggle for me, so try to give her something easy. But I mentioned to the boys one day, you know what, I'm going to make you oatmeal. And because I remember growing up, Dad made us eat oatmeal. And I said, I'm going to make you oatmeal. And at this point, they'd never had oatmeal before. And they said, no way. That sounds like something bad. I don't want to eat it. It doesn't sound good. We get waffles and pancakes and biscuits and syrup, and you want oatmeal? That just doesn't sound very appetizing. I said, well, it doesn't matter what you think. I'm making breakfast, so I'm going to make it. So I made it. They go, not only does it not sound appetizing, it doesn't look any good. And I said, well, you're going to eat it. You're going to at very least try it, and this is your breakfast for the day. Whether you want something else, too bad. You can't reach the flour. It's too high in the pantry. So I said, I'm making you oatmeal, but let me give you a little secret about the oatmeal. You don't eat it like that. And I pulled out the brown sugar, and I said, you got to put brown sugar in it first to make it taste good. And so I pile the brown sugar on, and it changes the color of the oatmeal. Because you got to put enough in there to make it taste good, like coffee. You got to put enough creamer in to make it taste good. And so I put the brown sugar in to make it taste good. And but still, they don't want to. They don't want to touch it because it doesn't look appetizing. They say, I don't want it. Experience tells them what they like is waffles and pancakes and biscuits. That's what they like, and Cheerios if you got them. not the regular, the honey nut. And if you got them, then that's what they want. That's what their experience tells them. And I said, well, I'm telling you something. You're going to like something new if you give it a shot. Just try it. I don't care what your experience has taught you. If you do this, it will change the way you think about breakfast. And each of them tried it, and they loved it. So much so that one of my kids told me this morning that is now his favorite breakfast, is oatmeal. Over waffles, over biscuits, over pancakes, and even every once in a while, I'll make homemade cinnamon rolls. Y'all should come to our house for breakfast. I'll make homemade cinnamon rolls, and even more than that, he likes oatmeal. He even begged for oatmeal yesterday and had it for lunch instead of pizza. What is up with that? And maybe if y'all don't like oatmeal, you're not putting enough brown sugar in it, I'll tell you right now. And but his experience told him that he wasn't going to like this thing. But once he tried it, he loved it. And so what we see here, we're going to see in the life of Thomas. His experience has told him one thing, but reality is going to teach him something completely different and new. He's going to have an element of unbelief, but Jesus is going to help him even in that unbelief. You see, we're going to start down in verse 24. Thomas was one of the 12 disciples. And Thomas often gets a bad rap. Have you ever heard doubting Thomas? Anybody ever heard somebody doubting Thomas? You hear Thomas, you never hear his name by itself. It's always doubting Thomas. We see him several times throughout Scripture, and he's always coming to Jesus when his name is mentioned, and he's presented as kind of a realist. He has a certain opinion about a certain situation, and he'll state that opinion, and it's always about what he perceives to be the reality of the situation. And so it's the same situation here. Jesus, having been with his disciples day in and day out for several years, Jesus is arrested, Jesus dies, is crucified, is buried, and his disciples, all of them, at this point 11, they're scared out of their minds. And so they all doubt, they all are fearful, even though Thomas is the one who's labeled as a doubter. They're all that way. Now look at verse 24 of John chapter 20. Now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger in the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." So Jesus has already come to the disciples. He's already appeared to them after he rose from the dead. It was Sunday morning. They were in a locked room because they thought he was dead and not coming back. They were scared that the Romans were going to come and arrest them. And so they're in this locked room, and Jesus appears, and they go crazy. He's alive, he's alive, he's alive. And later on, they see Thomas, from what we can understand. It's that same day, it's still Sunday, of Jesus' resurrection. They've seen Jesus, and later on they meet up with Thomas. Thomas comes. Maybe he was late that morning. He was getting breakfast. He was getting them all Chick-fil-A on the way there, which that would be amazing, right? If they had a Chick-fil-A in town. It was Jerusalem, so they probably did. And so he picks it up. He comes. He gets the chicken minis, and he shows up, and they say, "Jesus was already here. Jesus came. He's alive." Thomas hears their testimony, and he doesn't believe it. Thomas, who spent day in and day out with Jesus, who's seen Jesus do amazing miracles, he heard Jesus from Jesus' own mouth say, "I will be arrested, I will be killed, but don't worry, I will be raised from the dead." He heard Jesus say that. But here he is in the reality of the moment, having seen Jesus die, and then the rest of Jesus' statement went out the window. And he says to those disciples, this seems very harsh to me. "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." Thomas didn't want to get his hopes up. You know, he has this extreme comment here. I mean, this almost seems disrespectful and dishonorable. Unless I shove my fingers in the hole in his wrist and shove my fist in the side of Jesus, I will never believe. I will only believe if... ... Now, we do that often. We don't maybe not say it in such harsh tones as he does, but we kind of put a condition on our faith. I will only believe if. I will only believe if this happens. If my prayer is answered in the timetable that I want, in the way that I want, then I will believe and I will worship with my whole heart. But if it doesn't happen, then I will not, because experience has told me that it probably won't happen. I've prayed for stuff before and it wasn't answered the way I want in the time that I want, so I will not believe. And so Thomas here, this realist, this doubter, his experience has taught him that life isn't all hunky-dory and great. What he's really doing is, as a realist, he's kind of using reality as a disguise for his limited faith. His faith is obviously limited, just as the other disciples were. Jesus told them, I will raise from the dead, but these guys did not have faith enough to believe it. But he's using the reality that he has experienced in the past. People die and don't come back. That's reality. Jesus is going to die. They saw Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead. They saw somebody come back from the dead. But even in the moment when faced with the terrible prospect of Jesus being really dead, their entire belief system being turned on its head because they thought he was the Son of God, and then he died. And so he's thinking, well, I've got to go back to where I was before I met Jesus and start believing in what I had believed before, because I thought Jesus was the Son of God, but the Son of God's not supposed to die, and he died, and here he is, and it's Saturday, and now it's Sunday, and these guys said they saw him, but I never saw him, and so he must be dead and not really back, and they're playing a trick on me because they're not nice people. And Thomas, this realist, disguising his limited faith with his conditional belief, I will only believe if this happens. He's allowing his limited faith to dictate his actions. But his limited faith was dictated because of his experience. Experience really can limit our faith. Experience can limit our faith. That's just the way it happens sometimes. I've prayed about that thing for months, and God hasn't answered my prayer in the way I want. I prayed for that one person to turn back to Jesus. I've been praying for that person for decades, for God to change their heart, and he hasn't changed their heart, so I'm not going to believe it's going to happen anymore. So we may still even pray that thing, but we're not praying it as though it is going to happen with any sort of belief behind it. We're just saying the words to check it off. Okay, I prayed it, but there's no belief and faith behind what we're praying. We're praying, God, I pray that you would provide the money for this bill, and the money doesn't come in. So it didn't happen last month, so we don't believe it's going to happen this month, and we allow our past experience to limit, to put a ceiling on how much we're going to believe. That person wasn't healed, that person died, so when the next person gets sick and we start praying for that person, we don't really believe that God's going to heal this person. And we become like that dad back in Mark chapter 9. He brought that kid to Jesus, yes, but he was filled with unbelief when he brought him. Nothing else worked, I might as well try this. It won't really happen. He's anticipating the conversation he's going to have with his wife when he gets home when we took him, but it didn't work, just like the 20 other things we tried. But then he begs Jesus, I believe, but help me in that margin, in that percentage that I still do not yet believe. And we have here Thomas, who just a couple of days before would have put his life on the line for the Son of God. So he has belief within him, but there's still that element of unbelief that he may not believe fully. Now, I don't know about you. I mean, this has happened to me, that I have prayed for something, and if I really examined my thought processes and my heart in the prayer, I was not fully committed to the prayer. I'm thinking, I'm going to pray for this, but it's not really going to happen. Anybody else prayed that, or is it just me? In the minute places of your heart, you may, we're in church, it's Sunday, so we're all 100% filled with the Spirit and totally holy, and we've never doubted God ever in our entire life that he's always going to heal us in the exact way we want him to. That's maybe you. That's not me. There have been times that I have thought that, just being honest and transparent with you. I've prayed it, and in hindsight, I had to go back and say, you know what? I was kind of screwed up in the way I was praying. I wasn't really committed to that. I was just praying it because I felt like that's what you're supposed to do, but I wasn't really believing that God was going to do the thing, that God was going to do it. And I had to go back and ask for forgiveness and really genuinely get down on my knees and pray for the thing. Pray for the person, pray for the situation, pray for that family that's going through something awful, and not just say the words, but really pray it, really mean it, full of faith. Experience can limit our faith, as we see here with Thomas, as we saw with that father in Mark chapter 9. And then we see here in verse 25, that he puts that condition on his faith. I've got to see the mark of the nails. I've got to see the holes, be able to see through the holes in his wrists. I've got to see the place in his side that was stabbed with the spear. I've got to be able to see the hole or I won't believe. If I don't see it, I will never believe. Did you catch that? He says, never believe. It will not happen. I will not get my hopes up again. I will not go there again and have my hopes dashed and have all of the things I had put my hope in, have it just be pummeled by the reality of this life. I'm not going to put myself out on a limb anymore. He's protecting himself. I will never believe. He's communicating in a way that he's almost holding his faith ransom for God to do what he wants God to do. God, I will only believe in you and give you the fullness of 100% faith if you do X, Y, and Z in that order the way I want it to happen. So he's holding his faith ransom from the God of all creation by putting his condition here on his belief. But in reality, not the reality of the physical world, because this physical world isn't reality. Reality is a spiritual world that goes on into eternity. In reality, conditional faith limits us, not God. Conditional faith limits us, not God. God cannot be limited. You can't put a box around him and say, that is God. I can define him. I can fully understand him. He cannot be limited by our belief. What conditional faith does is it limits us. That's why we see Thomas here. I mean, he gets, we ridicule Thomas for the doubt that he had there standing in the room and for what he's about to experience. But he was limited in his faith. That didn't limit the fact that Jesus was about to show up and seek him out and show him what he was really wanting to see, that Jesus was raised from the dead. That didn't limit God from raising Jesus, but it limited Thomas from something phenomenal that we're going to see down in verse 29. But Thomas says this thing, I will never believe, verse 26. 8 days later, Jesus' disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them this time. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." And Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." So Jesus approaches Thomas. He seeks out this situation. 8 days later, they've been 8 days without seeing Jesus. He showed up that day on Resurrection Sunday and on Easter Sunday, and he showed all those other disciples that he was alive, the 10 other guys, he was alive, and they were testifying and proclaiming it, and then 8 days went by without any word from Jesus again. He shows up again the next week. Thomas just happens to be there this time, and he's still saying the entire week, "I will never believe unless I see him." So Jesus shows up in the room, and what does he say? "Peace be with you." This great, hopeful, joyous statement. And as he says that, everyone in the room is rejoicing. Oh, it's Jesus again. He singles out Thomas. Now, if you're Thomas and you're in that room, how small are you feeling right then? Just the fact that you see him, okay, they were telling the truth. And then he singles you out. And he repeats your words back to you. "Look, Thomas, look. Here they are. Here are the holes. Look, right here. Here's where they stabbed me. Check it out. Your fist, it'll fit." And Thomas can't even barely speak. He just answers, "My Lord and my God." I don't even know it's real. I didn't believe. And Jesus says, in verse 29, "Have you believed because you have seen me? But blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed." Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. It sounds good, but if you really look at that, Jesus is issuing a blessing on anyone who would believe without seeing. So back in verse 25, when Thomas says, "I will never believe unless I see it," he is missing out on the blessing that Jesus offers in verse 29. Thomas misses the blessing Jesus offered in 29 because of what he said in 25. He refuses to believe unless he sees it. He refuses to believe unless he experiences it. And Jesus says, that's great you believe because you saw me do something amazing and a miracle in your life. But blessed are those who believe without seeing, who have sightless belief. So how can we attain that blessing in 29? You say, well, I've never physically seen Jesus, so this applies to me. I believe without having to see him. Yes, but it's more than just believing in Jesus. Do you believe other things in your life that Jesus will do and accomplish? You see, sightless belief brings indestructible hope because sightless belief is indestructible hope. If we believe without having seen it, we can have hope that he will accomplish it. We see that in the life of Thomas from this point forward. Church history tells us he was martyred for the faith. That him having seen Jesus solidified his faith into his heart. So that in the future, as he goes and begins to tell more people about Jesus, he ends up getting killed because of his faith. Thomas did believe from this day forward, did not doubt again. And you know that father back in Mark chapter 9, that solidified his faith from that point forward. Every time he saw his son, he saw a miracle that God had delivered. Sightless belief is indestructible hope. You know, circumstances can obliterate hope. So much so that when our hope is destroyed because of circumstances or because of situations or because of prayers that don't get answered in the way we want, that experience will then tell us that it is foolish to hope again. That it's foolish to believe again, and we guard ourselves, and we don't want to put our hope out there again because we failed the last time we did, or the prayer didn't get answered the way we wanted it to last time, or we didn't get completely healed in the way that we wanted to be healed. We didn't have this happen, and all of the pain didn't immediately go away, and we're still suffering with this chronic thing for the rest of our lives, and because he didn't deliver us in that way, we're not going to believe or hope fully ever again. And so, in reality then, our hope isn't indestructible because we're not really believing. We're believing in that moment when we don't hope and we don't extend hope again, we're believing in what we see and what we feel and what we experience in the circumstance. We're not believing in what we can't see, in the power of Jesus, in the power that Jesus offers. You see, circumstances can change, and circumstances can shift like the direction of the wind. And you can set your heading in your life, and you can set the direction in your life based upon whichever way the wind blows. And if the wind blows this way, then that makes you happy, then you feel good. But if the wind blows this way and that doesn't make you happy, you feel bad. But when everything's going great and you're happy, you're hoping and all kinds of stuff. But when everything's going bad and you feel bad and your health is taking a turn for the worse and your finances is taking a turn for the worse, and you start hoping in anything beyond what you can feel. But if you set your heading and your direction based upon a compass that always points to the unseen north, you will experience the blessing he's talking about in verse 29. You see, hope that points to Jesus is indestructible because Jesus is our unchanging true north. Indestructible hope always points to Jesus. And hope that points to whichever the way the wind happens to blow will easily be shattered by our own emotional condition. Hope that points to whichever way the wind happens to blow will easily be shattered by our own emotional condition. Because what ends up happening is when we place our hope in the shifting winds of circumstance, we inadvertently create a God out of our happiness about the situation. We begin to worship, we won't say it, we won't think it, but we begin to worship how we feel. I still feel pain. I still feel struggle. I still feel I'm not happy because of this. And so I'm not going to put my hope out there and believe Jesus can change the situation really in how I pray because he hasn't done it in the past and he's not going to do it in the future. And so we really, in truth, begin to worship how we feel about the situation and not about the God who can change the situation, or we don't begin to worship the God who can deliver us ultimately in eternity. Now, where this really comes to a head is in some words that Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians. You see, Paul experienced the same kind of stuff. He went through something that he calls a thorn in the flesh. He said it was painful, and it was a struggle, and it caused him all sorts of grief in his life. And he prayed, and the imagery he uses in 2 Corinthians is he begs God to change it. He begs God to deliver him, but God doesn't. He doesn't. He says 3 different times, 3 separate times. This isn't just, praying consistently every once in a while for a period of time. I mean, this is on your knees, crying out for a season of life. Paul says he begs God to take this thing away, and God doesn't do it. Over and over and over again, he's begging God to take it away. And in the end, God tells him, he says, no, I will not take that away from you. You will suffer with that for the rest of your life. But my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness. And so what Paul said, he said, the conclusion I had to come to, where I had to get in my own spiritual life, is that this thing made me weak. This thing made me struggle. And he said, in reality, this entire world, this entire life is a struggle. There will always be pain. But the weaker that I am, the more God's power is revealed through me. He says, so then, may I be ever more weak. The idea being this thorn in the flesh, this pain I've been experiencing all this time, may God give me more of that so that I can have more access to his power. I don't know if you've ever been in that place spiritually. I have not. To say, God, make my life harder so you can be shown more real in it. That's a difficult place to be. If that is a level of spiritual maturity I have not reached yet. But that's where Paul was in his letter to the Corinthians. As I am weaker, God's power is revealed in a greater fashion. Because for Paul, and ultimately for Thomas after this encounter, his hope was not dependent upon how happy he was in his life in that moment. His hope wasn't dependent upon how pain-free his life was, both physical pain or emotional pain. For Paul, and again for Thomas, and probably for that father in Mark chapter 9 after that moment, their hope was not dependent upon life circumstance at all. Their hope became, from that point forward, rock solid, dependent upon Jesus. And their hope became indestructible. If life circumstance can knock out your hope, then it's not indestructible. And if it's not indestructible, your hope isn't pointing to Jesus. If life circumstance can rob you of your hope is not in Jesus. It's not. You're hoping in your happiness. You're hoping in your finances. You're hoping in the security you have because you've got X number of dollars in the bank. You're hoping in how safe you feel because you've got the alarm on your house. You're hoping in how this makes you feel and how that makes you feel. But if you're hoping in those things, you're not hoping in Jesus, and then your hope will be crushed. And you will end up like Thomas. I have been there. You will end up like Thomas. I won't believe unless God does this for me. And we begin to pray that way. God, I pray that you would make this happen. And in the back of our minds, we're saying, but I know you really won't because you haven't. I know you really won't because you haven't yet. And we'll get to the place Abraham was. You remember Abraham? Father Abraham had many sons. Well, there was a time he didn't. And God came to him and said, hey, Abraham, I'm going to give you a bunch of kids. And he was 75 years old. Year 1 went by. Year 2, year 3, no kids. 80 years old comes, no kids. 85, no kids. So Abraham begins to take matters into his own hands. I don't know if God tells you something, are you going to wait 10 years before something happens? Or are you going to get frustrated and impatient and say, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and do something on my own. God hasn't answered me in 10 years. So I'm not getting my hopes up anymore. I'm going to take matters into my own hands. And Abraham did. And he had a kid. But it was not the kid the way God wanted him to have the kid. Abraham had to wait 25 years to get an answer from God the way God wanted it to happen, in the time frame God wanted it to happen. Abraham had to be 100 years old before he could have the kid God wanted him to have. Anybody in here 100? Not yet? Maybe your kid's coming. Just wait. Just wait. You say, no, sir, God, kill me before that day comes. Some of you right now, if that happens, Jesus, you better come the next day. Because Abraham gets to be 100 years old before God answers him in the way God intended. 25 years he waited for God's answer. 25 years. Some of us get frustrated when we pray for something and God doesn't deliver us that afternoon. Talk about impatience, man. But that's who we are. That's who Thomas was. Jesus made him wait 8 days to see. 8 days. 8 days, the number of renewal. And then Jesus came to Thomas in his unbelief, just as he came and still delivered that man's son in his unbelief. And he'll come to us in our unbelief because he loves us. And still meet us where we are, just as we are, in the midst of the whatever level or percentage of unbelief we possess. He will still come because he loves us. He may not answer the prayer in the way you thought. You may still struggle for the next 25 years with that thing. Maybe you've begged God through 3 different seasons of life, just like Paul did, to take that thing away, to take that pain away, to take that struggle away, to take that temptation away, to change that person's heart, to change that person's life, to stop letting that person take advantage of you, to stop letting this happen and that happen and this happen. And God says, well, I'm not going to take it away. Because this world, this life is fallen. This world is, well, honestly, if you're a believer, this world is as bad as it's ever going to get. That pain you're feeling right now, it will not last forever, but this is as bad as it's ever going to feel. There will come a day when everything's going to be better. But if you don't know Jesus, if you don't have that hope in Jesus, this world is as good as it's ever going to get. That pain you've got, it will be worse because this is as good as it ever gets. Where's your hope? Is your hope in Jesus? Is your hope indestructible? That no matter the circumstance that comes, that no matter the pain that comes, you can rest in that promise that God gave to Paul. My grace is sufficient for you. The power that I have is made perfect in your weakness, in your pain, in your struggle. The more you can experience, if you will rely on me, I will give you more power. I will give you more peace. I will give you the strength to walk through it because I will walk through it with you. But you've got to rely on me and not allow your hope in this life to depend upon how you feel about your life circumstance right now. Because there will come a day that this will all be different. Because you know, for the Christian, we get to experience a whole new life. Abundant life. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever told you this before, but there's going to come a day, unless Jesus comes back, you're going to die. Spoiler. You're going to die, I'm going to die. That's part of being human. We get an admit one to death. But death is not the end. It's not the end. Like I said a minute ago, for the unbeliever, death is the introduction to something worse and terrible and awful. And Jesus doesn't want that. He wants everybody to believe. He wants death to be an introduction to something amazing. For the believer, death is just something that happens. It's an event. Death isn't death. Death is a part of life. Because death did not defeat Jesus on the cross, Jesus defeated death on the cross. And so death for us does not mean the end. Death really, in all honesty, means the beginning. It is the beginning. We exhale the polluted and nasty air of this world, and then we inhale in our new lungs the amazing air of eternity, and we get to experience something we've never thought possible. Because that's where our hope is. Our hope isn't in the climate change. Our hope isn't in everybody driving electric cars and the ozone being fixed. Our hope isn't colonization of Mars. Our hope isn't Elon Musk and building bigger rockets so that we can go into the solar system. Our hope isn't in whatever the movies tell us our hope should be in. Our hope is in Jesus and the eternity that comes from believing in his Son. That's where it is. It's not in the political system. It's not in what politician tweeted this to that one and this one to that one to get them in the headline so they can get a bigger name so then they can run for president in a couple of years. It's not about that. Our hope is in Jesus. And all this stuff is going to fade away. The green pews won't be in heaven. with the wax stains from the Christmas Eve candlelight service that my kids did. I see it every Sunday. It's right there. That's where we sat. Well, it may have been me. I may have been sitting. So maybe it's my wax stains from the Christmas Eve candlelight service. That's not going to be there. It's not. The pain you've got in your knee right now, not in heaven. The grief you've got in your heart because of that family member who died, that grief isn't going to be there. It won't. It's zero. The pain that comes from anxiety and stress and worry about family members, about your future, about what's going to happen in the political landscape in our country, about what's going to happen if that country actually finally launches their rockets. The stress and anxiety will be gone because we'll be looking full on in the face of the Son of God. We don't got to worry about rockets coming from nowhere. There won't be any nowhere. Revelation 21, Revelation 22, read it. It says, this world will disappear. You know what ends up happening? It's not a matter of, this earth continuing to exist. Basically, what happens is God shows up in his full glory at the end of the Bible, and it says earth flees from his presence. Because what is created cannot handle the full glory of God. So it flees, and so God brings down this new earth. He says the new heaven and the new earth. And the way it's phrased, it's almost like the new heaven earth. It's a combo deal. It's where we're going to live for all eternity. And it's big enough to handle whatever population gets there. Maybe it's ever expanding. Maybe that's the thing. I don't know. But it's creation as God fully intended it before sin ever entered this world. So will there be animals in heaven? Let me ask you, were there animals before sin entered the world? Yes. Yes. Will they be cool animals? Yeah, probably. I imagine there'll be animals in our senses we can't even comprehend. Colors we've never even thought possible because we'll be in new bodies with new eyeballs, with new, maybe even new senses that we can experience the glory of God through his created things. Just as Fred mentioned earlier in the service, seeing God's glory through the created things. And it will be a whole new level of worship we never thought we could even experience as we do here in song in a great way, in his scripture in a great way. We won't simply be reading his word, we'll be seeing his word as Jesus walks down the street. Where is your hope? Is your hope indestructible? Or has your hope been wiped out by what you have experienced? That's not to belittle what you've experienced. Some of you experienced things I never have and never will. And your hope may have been knocked out in the 12th round of a long, drawn-out fight. But your hope isn't down for the count. If you put it in Jesus, he'll pull you right back up, and he'll step into the ring, and it's over then. So right now, if you've never put your hope in Jesus, ever put your hope in him, you thought you have, but really, your hope was in how you felt. If you've never put your hope in Jesus, you can do it today. You can settle eternity. Death is no longer something to fear because you've got Jesus. You can take care of it right now. Easter's in a couple of weeks. What a better time. You come to believe today, man, we can baptize you on Easter and we'll celebrate in a way you never thought that could happen in a Baptist church with wax-stained green pews. It will happen right here in this room if you will believe that Jesus is God's Son, that he died for you, for me. He died for us so that all of our sins, all of the bad things we've done would be forgiven. And then he rose from the dead so that you can live after you die. You only think you're living now. You got no idea. So will you believe today? Or will you, if you are a believer who've put hope in a way, maybe you've put hope in the way that this person acts and this person obliterated your hope because they did something terrible. And And you're devastated because of what they did. You're devastated maybe because of the health situation that person's got. Don't put your hope in that. Put your hope in what Jesus can do through that person. Put your hope in what Jesus can do in this life, because what he did in the past will only change what we can do in the future because of what he did, not we did. Not they did, but what he did. Put your hope in Jesus from this point forward, and then your hope will be indestructible. Indestructible. There's no hope kryptonite that will take out what you've got if your hope is in Jesus.